ZestFest Conversations. This is the first time we've held ZestFest Conversations. And the reason it came about was, as Festival Director, and I'm Jane Bowes, Festival Director of ZestFest, I was approached by several different groups and individuals who said, I'd love to do a session at ZestFest, but I haven't really got enough for a whole event. But I think what I've got to say people will be interested in. And I heard that come from several different areas and thought, well, I've got something here. I've got a group of 5 different speakers with all interesting things to say, not connected to each other in any way whatsoever other than they're all about being an older person. So we decided to knit all those themes together and to create one day. I've had people already this morning say, it's too much, I can't come to a whole day. And it was never really intended that you would come and sit here for an hour and a half, hour and a half, hour and a half with no break. That's for me and my colleague to do. It was really to be able to find the most efficient way to be able to deliver these talks and interesting information to people in a format that was accessible. And I felt being in a very central location was key to that, so people could come and go. You're near the market, so if you wanted to hear the first session, go off and do a bit of shopping or have lunch or meet a friend, you could come back for another session later. So before I kick off and introduce our first speakers, I would like to acknowledge that the land we meet on today are the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and it was land that was never ceded. We respect the Kaurna people's spiritual relationship with their country, and we acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important and vital today to the living Kaurna people. So without further ado, I would now like to introduce you to the first session, Co-housing, Communities and Developments, an alternative to retirement villages. And we have today Alex from Westside Housing Company. Alex has a background in social research, community development and currently community housing as Sustainable Communities Project Officer with Westside. Michelle Hogan has worked in the community sector for the last 20 years and she's now working with Westside Housing conducting research into different types of housing models as both a celebration of the volunteer managed housing cooperative movement and to learn from other types of private co-housing sites. And lastly we've got Leah, who's co-founder of Miller's Corner. Miller's Corner is a unique social, ecological and sustainable co-housing community in the heart of the Adelaide Hills. She actively promotes intergenerational inclusion and village building. With over 25 years experience in the aged care sector as a nurse and occupational therapist, Leah understands the opportunities and challenges for ageing well at home and ageing well in the community. And they're all key things for us at COTA too. So welcome here this morning. Please welcome Westside Housing.
Thank you, Jane, for introducing us. As said, my name's Alex. I'm from Westside Housing. We're a community housing provider. You may start to wonder where you'd like to be living in the next stages of your life, where you'd like to grow old, what choices you have in living in a suitable home, and an environment where the positives outweigh the negatives. Is the place you call home suitable for you to age in place currently? Are you thinking about housing in relation to ageing well? Downsizing or right-sizing, these are some of the terms that get thrown around as opposed to scaling down and moving into smaller places. Retirement villages, residential living, shared housing or co-housing, what does it all mean? Hopefully we'll be able to wade through a few of those terms and explain a bit to you today. One of the ways we're reinventing retirement is by giving a new definition to the concept of retirement living. One of the unusual things about living in retirement villages is that everyone's the same of a certain age. There's no young families with children, there's no diversity.
Alex, people at the back are having trouble hearing you.
Okay.
Can you see if the mic's working?
Okay. I'll stand a bit closer for you. It's often segregated, gated, and if you're still feeling healthy and active, it might not be the right choice for you to make it at the stage of your life that you're at the moment. Today there's a much broader continuum of possibilities and options for people in retirement to want to live with autonomy and purpose within their community. We will speak about some of these options today. So this is just another list of who we are. A bit of housekeeping. We'll aim to speak for 10 to 15 minutes each, leaving about 15 minutes at the end for question and answers. So hopefully we get through it and you can do the question, if you can reserve your questions till the end. Also, another bit of housekeeping, just down towards the end of the corridor on the left hand side is where the toilets are. And there's water just here in the little dispensary if you get thirsty. So my context in this is I work for a community housing provider. I'm here to talk about how current conditions in the housing market is leading to a need for awareness and a change in housing. I work in community housing and we're trying to look towards innovation in housing to meet the needs of current people experiencing homelessness and at risk of housing insecurity. So social housing exists to support those in the community in need of security and safety of affordable and long-term tenure, which means you move into a home and you're not going to get kicked out when the landlord decides they want to sell it, renovate it, subdivide. Yes, it's a lot safer. If you want to live in community or public housing, you need to apply. So I've put the logos on here because the visual descriptors are sometimes a lot easier than just explaining it. SAHA, South Australian Housing Authority, was Housing SA, was Renewal SA, was a lot of things, but it's currently called SA Housing Authority, so that's public housing. That's where most of the social housing exists in South Australia. But you may have seen some of the logos of everyone else down the bottom here. So Uniting SA, Junction, Unity, Salvation Army, yeah, there's a lot out there. There's about 21 in Adelaide and rural South Australia, but we only have about a quarter of the social housing in South Australia. Westside Housing is where I'm from, the orange one in the middle. We've recently rebranded, so you may have seen Westside Housing Association in blue, but we're now orange. And Common Equity Housing is almost like a parent body conglomeration of what we call Tier 3 volunteer managed community housing providers. Has anyone ever heard of a housing co-op? Yep. So regulatory changes mean that the Tier 3 smaller volunteer-run community housing cooperatives are being slowly pushed out because there's a lot of regulatory requirements. And CESA is a body that will take you on and still let you run with a little bit more autonomy and say, like you would have if you're independent. So if you're interested in community housing, CESA is one that does still let in people who have a less of a risk of housing insecurity than traditional social housing. Yeah, I will move on. Eligibility criteria for moving into community housing is you must be a resident of South Australia, not be a homeowner, have independent income, which can be Centrelink, and be on a low income, not have too much money or assets. So, yeah, you're in need of supported housing. If you're interested in applying, generally we recommend you visit a SAHA office, South Australian Housing Authority. There's two lists you can go on, community housing, public housing. You can choose one or the other, or both. If you want the best chance of getting a home, you go on both and you choose as many areas as you can that you'd like to live in. You can go to a community housing provider and get on the list, but you'll only be put on the list for that community housing provider, so it narrows your options a little bit. So I'm giving an overview a little bit today. I know everyone's here interested in talking about co-housing and community developments, but some people might not know about community housing and social housing, so I'm giving a bit of an overview today. It's not a wait list as well. People in need will be offered a house first when it becomes available. There's two types of accommodation most of our community housing providers offer. First is social housing. It's government subsidised. People pay 25% of their rent. So say you, I'm not too savvy with current rates of pension or new start or anything, but say you receive $350 a week, you pay 25% of that. So $75, $80-ish. And that makes it affordable and sustainable for a household or single household budget as well. The second is affordable housing, and we offer these properties at reduced than market rent. So generally it's 74.9% of the market rent, and a lot of these are called NRAS. I don't know if anyone's heard of NRAS. It's a scheme that's been around for about 10 years and offers below market rent to people on low incomes. So you'll probably, and generally they're offered on the private market as well. So it's another option that's out there, and that's part of the housing type we hear on the news about, talk about needing more affordable homes for people. So Who owns a home? A great deal of people. Who's renting? And who lives in a community housing or knows of someone living in community or social housing? One. Fabulous. So you can see here research from the Grattan Institute shows that over all age groups home ownership is falling, and predominantly it's the younger people who are suffering there, but it's also people on the lowest incomes as well. So home ownership's becoming for the people who've got more money. Yeah, so it's not a great trend. What happens? You can see that the older age groups are more steady. This is probably because they've paid off their mortgage and have got a little bit more of a security around housing. But what happens if you enter into retirement without security of housing, without income? Your rent becomes unaffordable. You stop working, you lose a partner, or you suffer an unexpected illness. Generally, the fallback is family, friends, living with unaffordable rents, eating into superannuation, or social housing. And if anyone is interested in social housing towards the end, I've got a few really thick packs at the back table there, and we'll be doing some follow-up emails with links and information after the presentation as well. The other context in South Australia and Australia-wide is that there's lots of people on waiting lists, and not enough housing. So there's just over 46,000 social housing dwellings in South Australia, 32,000 public housing, just over 11,000 community housing, a few thousand from other types, but there's 35,000 people waiting. Last year I think our turnover was about 20%, generally it's about 20%, so 20% of our households move on to buying, renting, other types of housing, 20% move in. So if you can imagine, if there's only 10 to 20% turnover every year throughout all of the housing providers, you're still not going to house everyone in the period in which they need it. We also, community housing has limited funds. We don't get any government funding. We don't have any government subsidies. We operate just on the rent that we collect from our tenants. So we're seeing an increasing need in those needing urgent housing, and we're not seeing a drastic increase in the homes. There's actually 20,000 less social housing homes available in South Australia than there was in the mid-1990s. And we also saw, another note I've got here, 2016 we saw a figure come out that there was a 31% increase in homeless women over 55 experiencing homelessness as well. So for us and a lot of other community housing providers and South Australian Housing Authority, it's becoming a pretty significant issue and problem we're trying to tackle with housing. But as you know, housing doesn't go up like that, so it's a few years to get any noticeable gains. Just a bit of information about Westside Housing. This is from our most recent annual report that we haven't published yet. It's coming out shortly. So you can see we've actually got almost 50% of our population in our homes is over 55. We've got almost 50% of people are single. We've got 2/3 of our population are female. So this relates to the head tenant, so the person who applies. They can have with them a partner, dependents, sister, brother, parent. This is the person who's been in need of housing security, is applied and has gone on the list. So you can see I've got a little box over here as well. Australia-wide, this was a 2016 statistic. There's 24.4% of people living alone. Community housing overall, 60.9%. So there's a lot of single people, and that leads to social isolation, loneliness, and a lot of other health and social impacts as well. As I've got here, loneliness and isolation, as I just touched on, is becoming an issue. We're all living alone a lot more, we're not interacting as much. We've got big backyards, small front yards, we've got garages we close as soon as we get home driving in our cars, and we just don't have this type of interaction with our community and neighbours as we used to. So the reduction in lifespan for people experiencing loneliness is similar to that caused by smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And it's greater than the impact of a lifespan of obesity. Looking even deeper, you'll find loneliness is associated with a greater risk of heart disease, depression, anxiety and dementia. And I also heard from a speech I went to at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, TAXI, that it can spread faster than a virus. So, yeah, it's, once it starts, it just grows out with, and when you've got the high density of people, lots of people lonely, lots of animosity, it just builds and builds and gets worse. There we go. So Westside Housing, we know this, we're trying to address that. A lot of community housing providers are. We operate to encourage social interactions. For example, Westside Housing offers money for kids to play sport in their local community. We do busy bees. We get people together on social outings. We have a tool library to help support people, maintain their home when they don't have the funds otherwise to do so. And that's how we operate. It's how most community housing providers operate, and it's the value-added service that sets us as apart from SAHA, from SA Housing Authority. We like to think that we're going to try and tackle some of the issues related to social isolation, loneliness, neighbourhood disputes, helping people's finances so they can go out and be a little more socially independent and get along with more people in the community. So we're trying to do this in a few ways, doing urban infill and higher density, bringing people within closer parameters to each other and access to services. We're borrowing from co-housing cooperative success as well, so this is where my talk and my relationship with Michelle and Leah comes in. And I'm going to pass over to Michelle in a second. We're going to build better homes to reduce bills for people so they've got more money to spend on the things that they want to do. We're going to design homes to age in place, and this already happens with a lot of housing providers in Australia and South Australia, but we need to, and we will be getting better at it. And creating communal space for interaction, so it's the place making, it's, having paths that go past people's front doors, communal sitting areas, gardens, all that kind of stuff. And anyway, I'll pass over to Michelle now. Thank you for having me. And she's going to be talking about her research into both cooperative housing, so the Tier 3 volunteer managed cooperative housing sites, and also private co-housing that she's come across.
Thanks, Alex. And I suppose you'll be getting a bit of a feel from the themes that are riding through this presentation is around looking at how we can look at different forms of housing offerings for young people or for older people, which deal with how people can cooperate to have a better life and deal with that aspect of isolation. So one of the things that I've done is I live in a cooperative myself. It's a big old house in the Esplanade, and it's been running for 20 years. And I was kind of interested. I don't plan to stay there as I age. It's completely inappropriate. It's got stairs everywhere. It's extremely disability unfriendly. And so I've started to contemplate a plan to move into another cooperative that I want to start from scratch. That had given me an idea about looking at the success of other cooperatives in South Australia. And I also was interested in working with a public housing association, partly because I knew they had a strong tradition of cooperative housing since the 80s, late 70s, and that was in demise. And so it was a good opportunity to interview some of those members of public housing cooperatives in order to get learnings from how it worked, how they found it, and also to provide a comparison between housing for low-income people and what is often housing for middle-class people. There is a distinct income difference, although all of the people that I did talk to in the private co-ops weren't high-income earners, but they did predominantly hold professional jobs. So there's quite a difference. But some of the themes in terms of the benefits they saw about living collectively were certainly the same. So that's where I come into the picture. And one of the people that I interviewed was Miller's Corner, and some of the occupants of my own collective. And I interviewed a whole lot of Westside public housing members who had lived in cooperatives for years. So that's how it worked. And I suppose I was also interested from the perspective of the whole notion of public and private, and I certainly support a continued in this whole retirement and residential retirement village sort of phenomena, a public strand to that. It's become very orientated towards people who can pay, and we need some options in the public system, because that's why we pay taxes. We pay taxes to provide services to our people, to our residents, particularly those who are older or in less fortunate circumstances to ourselves. It's what being a developed country is all about. And so I was very interested in bringing that theme of public provision of good options for residential care as well. So that's where the public stuff came in, and actually I'll just check whether actually before I go on, I've used in the paper that I've written, I've also used a notion around how one of the few people that's written about public cooperatives in South Australia, David Kilner, and you can kind of easily look him up by just doing a Google search. He uses a concept of, when he's talking about cooperatives, of non-equity, shared equity or part equity and full equity. And I use that term in my paper, and it just is helpful to make the distinction between them, because while there aren't a lot of shared equity opportunities in South Australia yet, it is one of the areas that's potential for development between private sector and public sector, and so that was one of the things I was interested in working with Alex. But also it makes the distinction in terms of, being part of a cooperative philosophy, but being, differently funded. And they all subscribe to a similar philosophy around participatory democracy, consensus, mutual aid, volunteerism. And they all use the creation of bylaws or articles, depending on the legal structure they use, to guide their operations. And for the public sector too, one of the great things about cooperatives when they first started was they enabled groups to form around particular issues. For example, single men who'd been diagnosed with HIV were finding it very difficult in the early days to get housing, because people believed you could get HIV from touching the counter, and so they formed a cooperative and housed a lot of single men, and that cooperative is still going. Things like single parents, artists and creatives, they all formed cooperatives around their needs, and it gave people the opportunity to, have more say about what sort of housing they received off the public purse. And that was also a fabulous thing, and still continues to be a fabulous thing. There's just less of them around. So that was kind of part of the motivation of putting this paper together. So there I'm using that terminology. Shared equity is basically, as it says, you get another organisation involved in the financing, and it can mean that they might ultimately own that house, or it might remain shared and you just have secure tenure. The other strand that's running through the paper that I'm developing is also around government policy being around secure housing, not necessarily privately owned housing. We do have a bias in government policy to encourage people to purchase their own, and in other countries, social housing, publicly owned housing, rental accommodation is a much bigger sector, and I think it's where we have to invest more. Not everyone can afford a home, and nor do we need to all own homes. It's an unsustainable development in terms of resources. We're all living on, huge blocks in South Australia. It attests to the popularity of subdividing that we're all sitting on plenty of land. And really, increasingly, we have to think about whether that is, you know, a environmentally sustainable phenomena, let alone one that's really meeting people's housing needs, particularly as they grow older and those large blocks and large houses become much more difficult to maintain. So the private co-ops, and I suppose I've spent a bit more time in this presentation looking at the private co-ops. A number of them are over 20 years old, and so they are also looking at their future for their ageing occupants and who's going to move into them next. So it's been a quite interesting discussion to have, and it's really only one of the themes of the paper, because what initially drove me was trying to encourage younger people to share cost and make entrance into the housing market more possible. So this picks up the whole issue of planning for the future, how we can take the learnings from and admittedly, you know, there's only a handful of private co-ops and public ones to enable more people to contemplate this form of housing. We're all used to and have, you know, probably some bad memories of cooperative housing being, you know, that notion of, you know, piles of dishes left in the sink and, you know, the unpleasantness of having to put up with other people's bad behaviour. But really, these cooperatives are all completely self-contained. You're not sharing a kitchen. And really what you're doing is sharing resources and surrounding land. And so, for example, this cooperative also facilitated the saving of this beautiful old building, as has the one that I live in. This was a school, a private school, and it had ended up being a rooming house when the owners grew old and then died. And so they were ex-Flinders University students. So it did have a bit of a hippie background to it, but they definitely aren't now, because they've had a lot of turnover, particularly because of the location it's in, but also because those original people got together and heritage listed this place and the grounds. So it's got a botanical heritage listing, which is quite rare, and they've got beautiful old trees and beautiful bird life. And, you know, over time, they've built a pool and a spa in the backyard because they got together and shared the cost. And a lot more people use it because they've got together and, you know, share the usage. So some of those things is really hearing the stories about the possibilities that cooperative living can offer you, that's not as isolated, you know, in terms of where you spend your resources and hold your private property. So, you know, Australians aren't quite used to that with our preoccupation with our own quarter-acre block and, you know, fences. So, but really it does take a bit of planning ahead, and particularly if you're contemplating it now, it is work. And living in a co-op is work as well, because, you know, the sorts of things you're doing are sharing maintenance, participating in meetings. So, you know, it's not all a glory trip, without a doubt, but it is a very productive, and I've really enjoyed, and all of the people that I interviewed, both public and private, have enjoyed the experience of living in a cooperative. And I suppose it's really, part of this is just getting people to think about it by providing some practical examples. So yeah, here I've said that this no doubt requires work, and this particular co-op, this is at Christie Walk, and they plan their development over time. This is the one that's on Sturt Street, just near Whitmore Square. It's had a bit more PR than a number of the other co-ops that I spoke to, there's 42, I think, households there, so it's kind of quite a big establishment, bigger than it looks from the front. For example, this woman, when they first built, that place is multi-storey. They have some single stories as well, but they thought about things like needing a lift, but they didn't actually put it in. They built in the original structure a lift well, and then they are now in the process of installing a lift. This woman that I interviewed had just broken her ankle, and she was really, you know, being the motivated one in the group for installing a lift now. So, you know, some of that is, you know, thinking through what's needed to be done, but also a number of them are now also thinking about the kind of thing that Leah will talk about, which is planning from scratch. The design needed to age at home, and I'm certainly looking at that too in terms of you know, designing in all of the disability access that we'll require. And so on that, I will hand over to Leah to talk about a much more specific practical example of a design to age at home.
Good morning all, and thank you to Michelle and Alex for telling us a little bit about their housing journey. I'm very pleased to be here and tell you something about our social and intergenerational co-housing community in the beautiful Adelaide Hills. Graham and I, and my husband is the person making the movies today, behind you. We moved with our family around 24 years ago from Sydney to what was then still very rural Mount Barker. Thank you, that's helpful. And moved to a 2-acre property right in the heart of Mount Barker, which is a bit unheard of. It had a paddock to the left and a paddock at the back. And around 13 to 15 years ago, we got a knock on the door. The developer next door came to ask if he could purchase our property. He told us he was building a retirement village and our property would help him to make it even bigger. We had a chat, and as an occupational therapist working in the community, the concept of retirement villages just doesn't sit with me very well. So I asked him, what is it about retirement villages, what attracts people? So he went on to talk about security and safety and how a high priority that is for all the people. And that has me concerned, because my question is, what is it about society that people don't feel safe living in their own home, in their own neighbourhood anymore? And what can we do to ensure that our neighbourhoods are friendlier, safer and more supportive of each other? So the retirement village was built and we did not sell. 2 years after that, another knock on the door, this time to the developer at the back of the property. Same reason, same request. Anyhow, Graham and I realised that these people weren't going away. If we were gone, then our block of land would be developed. Simple as that. And if we didn't like to see the brick veneer buildings, all houses, all sardined together, and the house just about as big as the block of land they built on, and we wanted to do it differently, we felt it was our responsibility to do it differently. So that's what we did. We became ma and pa developers, and we are building a small co-housing village. But I'm not here to actually talk about the nuts and bolts of land subdividing and building houses. But I want to tell you about what it means to actually build a socially designed neighbourhood and the benefits of being part of one. So Miller's Corner, a co-housing community, as I said, in the heart of Mount Barker, will have private homes clustered around our shared common facilities, which we call Forest House. That's the image in the middle. This village-like cluster of specifically energy-efficient designed homes are to meet the needs of children, adults, the elderly, and or a person living with a disability. Our focus is on the community by being good, friendly and engaging neighbours. Miller's Corner is now in the early building stages, and I'm excited to say we've got a couple of builders on the property and some of the houses are getting off the ground. So it's a hive of activity. And in regards to building sustainably, we will be building with hempcrete. So on the property there is already an existing house, that's our home, and there is a garage and a granny flat. And we then divided the land in 10 different blocks of land. And our future residents consist at the moment at 4 young families, 2 older single women, a young 30-year-old woman, and Graham and myself in our early 60s. So our core group has been established. For us, intergenerational means it includes people of all ages and not segregated like a retirement village. It takes a village to age well. Being connected to others is so important for our physical as well as our psychosocial well-being. We need strong ties with our family, our friends and our neighbours, as they are the ones who actually provide us with the safety and the security, the support, the happiness and that sense of belonging. As the social and the Australian social researcher Hugh Mackay likes to say, where we live matters, but most importantly, it needs to be a home, a place we feel we belong. And I want you to think about that particular comment. What is it for you that gives you that sense of belonging? What are the elements? Does there anything come to mind you want to just call out at the top of your head?
So I've designed my home because I work from home a lot. So every view out of every window is just simple but magnificent. So it has plants and it feels like it's just magical to be there. It's just absolutely beautiful.
Right.
Yeah, so that fills me up and then I get my connection elsewhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, another thing for me is I can walk out my front door and people say, oh, hi Kate.
Yes.
Right.
And we
Yep.
have chats, and another chap across the road every day basically sits out on his front veranda with chairs, and it's almost become a bit of a meeting point.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, it's really lovely actually.
Great. Good. Yeah, that's exactly it. Just makes you feel at home, that sense of belonging.
Hi. I think for me, I've been at a desk and I've just gone into semi-retirement for 25 years. I'm really, really keen to be part of a community garden that grows food. So that for me would be a great sense of belonging, working with other members in the co-op, whatever you want to call it, growing food, sharing produce and getting to know people that way.
Great. Good. Thank you for your comment. We may hold off on some of the others because I've got a lengthy story to tell you. I made 5 major moves in my life and home and belonging really became a strong part. And it actually has become the driving force for the project we're doing now. So my work, my interest and my passion of working with people, older people in the community, is to support them, to make sure that they age well at home in their communities. So that work has given me great insight into their needs, their challenges as well as the opportunities of aging well at home in their own neighbourhoods. Most of my clients express the wish to live and die in their own homes. And it's by listening to those needs that I begin to explore what enables us to age well in our communities and what could be the benefits of co-housing for the older individuals. Now, a literature review undertaken by Maria Brenton, who is an academic and the founder of the Older Women's Co-housing Community in London, she found that the outcomes as far as the older individuals were concerned living in co-housing can give an enhanced sense of well-being, a reduction of loneliness and social isolation, continued activity and engagement, the possibility of staying healthier for longer, and finally continued personal autonomy and independence. So over the last 8 years I have been looking at the various housing and urban design options, particularly in the Netherlands, that's my country of origin. And in April this year, Graham and I travelled to California in the United States and visited 3 co-housing communities there, of which one was a senior, very vibrant senior co-housing community, so completely independently run. And it was a wonderful experience to be part of that. In August I travelled on my own back to the Netherlands and to the United Kingdom, and again had the opportunity to visit 6 different places there. Now, the variety of alternative housing options for the different people units, I would say. It's not only older people, it's single people, it is people, single parents, so they're all different family units in a way. So that is so well integrated within their normal urban designs, in their normal communities. It is just seen as the norm, while we think it's rather alternative. They just accept it all as normal. So whilst I was in the Netherlands 2 months ago, I met up with Jan Ruiten, and he told me the story of his father. And his father said, when I'm old, I invite Peter to live with me, because Peter is a fantastic chess player. Harry, because he's a good cook. And Meredith, she's got green fingers, she turns the garden into a delight. Now, his father had a very large house, and he said each of them can have their own rooms, because there is enough space. But I want them all to bring their own comfy lounge chair and bring that into the lounge room. So he said we can enjoy becoming old together. And that really inspired Jan, and that turned him into a vision for building a thuishuis. And translate a thuishuis into English, it becomes a home house. And a home house is a place where people 55, 60 and older can age together in an enjoyable, social and autonomous manner. It's a large, ordinary house with 6 individual private apartments. So each private apartment has a living room, a bedroom, a bathroom and a small kitchenette. But together they share a lot of common facilities. There is a larger lounge living space, a wonderful appointed kitchen, there is a guest room, there is a, what was the other one? Laundry, there is an activity and a storage space and a shared garden. So essentially, people 60 plus, living in their own space, surrounded by their friends, with whom, if they wish, they can share the common facilities. The importance of social connection, both Alex and Michelle mentioned it, is of huge importance here. We all probably know of single, older people who live on their own but who don't like living on their own. And then there is a greater chance for loneliness and social isolation. There may well be one or two people amongst us here who feel themselves in that situation. So what you see here on the slide, that is our architect's artistic impression of a home house we would like to build at Miller's Corner, as we wish to ensure that older individuals are an integral part of our intergenerational community. So our initial conversation with our local council, our mayor and a senior planner was very positive. So we're now exploring the way forward. We seek people in that age bracket who would like to become part of a home house, who have an interest in living there, and then we can get together and see if we can get it built. Or else Graham and I may have to look at forming partnerships with housing associations or find investors to ensure we're getting this done. I think it's an exciting time, and for me there is that real clear knowledge that this is a wonderful and positive, safe and secure housing option to actively aging with quality of life in your own communities. Now, a home house supports aging, supports living and enjoy becoming all together in your own communities. What also supports aging well is engaging in conversation series. So with the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, TAXI, which was mentioned earlier before, I designed and facilitate a series of conversations. And it's about having that talk together. What is it for each of us as individuals important to age well, because we can learn from each other. Just there is an outline of the various topics we talk about. We can't escape getting older, and therefore it is important to be better informed and to prepare ourselves to courageously age well in our communities. So I strongly encourage you to consider taking part in these conversations and to be able to make informed decisions for your own aging future. That may help you to consider co-sharing, a home house, co-housing, right-sizing, downsizing, that you know that you're making those decisions for the right reasons. So this brings us actually to the end of the conversation, and if you like to find out more about Alex's Westside reference groups or projects, or about Michelle's research on cooperative sharing and co-housing, or more about Miller's Corner, the home house or the conversation series, on this table behind this big pillar is a large sheet of paper, so please provide us with your contact details, your name and contact details, and tick the boxes of where you want to have some more information about, and we can get back to you. So thank you all.
So we've got about 10 minutes for questions if anyone has questions for myself, Michelle or Leah. Yep.
I found that talk really inspirational, thank you. I know that part of ageing is diet, nutrition and remaining fit. All of those things are important. And so I guess my question is, would you contemplate people having their animals at Miller's Corner?
There is a pet policy, and yes we do, but prefer to have one pet per household. And also it's about being responsible pet owners. So if there are people who have a cat, then that cat is to be outside in a cat run, or whatever it's called.
That's really good to hear, because there's such a common story about people going into nursing homes and not being able to take their animals, and it's very sad. Very, very sad. So I'm really glad that you're open to that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was going to say also with community housing in Westside, different organisations have different policies, but we do encourage people to have their pets within the allowances of where they live as well. So that's something that community housing has to know too.
Me? Yep. So I would like future thinking about the intellectual capacity of ageing. What I don't hear is about our intellect. So it's assumed that and also challenging the myth of retiring. I'm not ever going to retire. Why would I do that? I love what I do. So we need to change the language and consider. So if you're looking at these things, I would never go to an over 50s club. I'm not going to bowl and do all that stuff. It would make me vomit. I have to use my intellect. And so we've all got an intellect. So let's completely change the dialogue and think, all right, might be 50, 60 or 70, what am I going to do? What business am I going to start? What university am I going to travel to hear a lecture? So let's get that dialogue going, because we're considered to be old and stupid. I mean, that's offensive. You know, I'm better than I've ever been. I'm smart, I'm a nicer person, and I'm sure we all are.
Michelle just mentioned that too. She talked about it being work. For us, it is about being actively engaged and still make the decisions on your terms, not like retirement villages where there is rules and regulations. Sure, you have the bylaws, so there are some of that, but you are the one, as an active member of the community, who help write the bylaws, and together you make agreements.
But if we don't have that concept to start with, baby boomers think that they're old and not interested. So we've been conditioned to think like that for so long. So I'm an activist. I came out of the womb an activist, and that's unfortunate for a lot of people. But we all need to teach people how to be activists.
If you want to put your name down on the A3 sheet, we're looking at doing innovative housing options and solutions, and diversifying from the current social housing market with some of our future developments, and putting together reference groups of people who have lived a very active life and have a lot of input they can provide into what we're going to design. It's very valuable to us. So if you wanted to put your name down and just tick West Side, and I can make sure that we get in touch in the future when we're ready for that.
And I think too that there are generations now of activists who are now aging and who are going to reinvent.
We're not going to lie down
how you age. And I think the broader thing is, I certainly personally wasn't thinking about my aging needs as something that was exciting, and I am now thinking that. It has completely changed my mind about contemplating my future.
And it is our responsibility. Simple as that. Yeah.
I'm interested in the financial side of the home house. Do people pay rent, or they own sharing it, or?
Well, that's still for us to explore. I strongly believe it is a really wonderful housing option. The best thing is, can we get 5 or 6 friends together?
All at the same time with...
And talk about this. How would you like it to look? This, what we showed, was an artist's impression, and it would fit within the whole landscape. We've got a bigger map at the back table there. So that home house would sit there. And it really, it fits within that. You're looking within the community. You're an integral part of the community.
Yeah, I'm just interested in it.
So the great part is, can we get 6 people together and say, well, this is what we want. How much will it cost? Can we do it? If we can't get that and we still want to get it built, we may need to get partnerships with others, or build it ourselves and then indeed rent it out or sell it. For some people it is, when I see it built, oh that's it, I want to move in. We like to have creative people who say, how do we want it? Because we the baby boomers, and we want it this way.
And can I just make a comment to the behind? There's a lot of grandparents in the Extinction Rebellion group. If you want to
I
go
know,
to.
it's amazing.
I should have worn my T-shirt.
Well,
I'll talk to you about it.
I've known this show for decades, and so there are lots of activists out there. But we've just got to claim our right and change the world. We've got to continue to do that.
I'd like to tell a quick story. I've just moved from 50 acres where I couldn't see another house to 600 square metres, a block 600 square metres. And the only reason I purchased that block, which happens to be there, is because it has two components. One, a big old tree, and I'm a tree researcher, and a distant view. And I've just presented a paper about removal of trees in the urban landscape, thinking about Mount Barker and some of the developments there. And thinking about the concept of depression and the lack of greening in relation to housing developments, I'm really concerned that, and I can see some schematic trees here, but in some of even the community housing or the social housing, to greenscape some of those areas is so vital. Whereas the developers and the builders are just saying, oh, we can step from this route to that route without having any distance vision. It's
Yeah.
a really vital planning.
It's a very important thing that I am trying to push a lot more as well. I've become a lot more aware of water sensitive area design and trying to have around 30% of acreage coverage with greening, so lawn, shading, trees, utilising it to the advantage of passive solar design for homes as well. And I feel there's a big disconnect between developers and
And even just
but
heat mapping,
it should be
you know, we're creating very, very hot suburbs.
the urban island effect, and
Well, if I could just make a plea to anybody who probably doesn't know, but the native vegetation clearance legislation does not apply to the urban landscape. It only applies to the rural landscape, and it's actually under review right now. And so under the, I think there's a comment system that you can do on the government website, and you'll say, then unless that legislation starts to apply to the urban landscape and stop the clearance of trees, and by putting a really significant value on trees to make the developers, change the colour of their underwear, then these trees are not going to be retained.
In my area, some of us talk about nutrition. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, sorry, you go and then we'll go.
Sorry, I apologise.
Sorry.
I apologise to you. If people are surrounded by greenery and if they're involved in food gardens, they eat better. And if you eat better, you're going to live better. And if you're lonely, you don't eat as well. And you know, you have to eat to live. So you know, that's really important. Really important.
Miller's Corner will have community gardens, so there is a lot of communal space.
Just here and then over there.
I was just going to, I'm really pleased that the gentleman raised what he did about trees. I live in Belair and I live in a street in Belair, and many of us in the street know each other, not all, but many. We have all of those components. What we don't have is exactly what you raised. So every house that is currently being sold in our street, because an old person has passed away, and it's an older house, the whole block has been cleared and a house is taken up 2 centimetres from either side, and they have a lovely view of everybody else's trees. If I'm sounding a little angry about that, I am, because I bought my house for the ambience because it was an unusual street. I have friends, and we have this community. We have children with disabilities. We have young, old. We all support each other. Somebody had a friend of ours had a stroke, mini stroke, a couple of weeks ago. Somebody took him to hospital. We've been going around and socialising. Blah 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 blah. What we can't control, and what I can see is different here, is that you have a shared values base on many aspects of the property. And our shared value base in the street is diminishing every time a house gets sold.
Maybe you should get together
Because
those lots.
well, we do talk, but we can't control every house, and we can't control people's need for the dollar.
Yeah, I was going to say, in your area, bushfire regulations might mean that they have to clear those lots. I thought we're going through a process of
I grew up in the country. I've always lived, I don't call the Adelaide Hills country, and I've always lived in the Adelaide Hills. I just think you move there and you take the risks.
Yeah. One more question.
Sorry.
That's right.
We're running out of time.
Mine's not a question, it's just a comment. That I actually need space to create because I paint, etc. So in community housing, there does need to be some space for people to create and make a nest.
Yeah, so can I ask Claire, what is the average size of each lot? So 300
Growing is a lot better with those things than I am.
The largest ones are just over 400 square metres and the smallest ones around 300.
The thing is, you would design your own house. So if you need a space to have an artist studio, you design your home to have an artist studio.
And the home house is all shared space as well, isn't it?
The home house will have a shared space and it will have an activity space when that's built. But forest house is in the process of being built, and again, that can be used for activities, for a yoga class or whatever.
Sorry, we are going to have to stop it there because we've got another group coming in.
Don't stand up just yet. No idea as an Australian how important the horizon is to me. Wasn't until I moved to Hong Kong. I rent, and I rent in a beautiful leafy suburb. However, I'm seeing exactly the same thing that you've mentioned, Julia, raising of trees in new developments. I've started once a month, the first Sunday of the month, community cafe on my front veranda. I ask everyone to bring their own mug. You can either put your own brew in it if you've got your own special one, or we've made a little bench outside the kitchen window so they can actually put it through where my 16-year-old is the barista, makes coffee for them. Just as a way of regularly getting together and trying to keep community alive and active. I think these things are really key to us, and I totally agree with what you said, woman in the rusty coloured frock is writing, yeah. And that is why we have ZestFest, because what we're doing is talking about modern ageing, and that is exactly what you hit the nail on the head with, that you don't want to be considered ageing, wheeled away, mothballed, and not being intellectual, not being active. ZestFest is about being active. It is about making our own determination and intentionality in ageing. We have a session on Monday called Zestfulness Workshop, where we're actually providing free, what would probably be termed professional development or personal development, where people will have the opportunity to identify what are their values and purpose. Make conscious decisions about how we want to live our lives, and that's a free session on Monday at the Granger Studio. You're more than welcome to come along to that. I would ask that you please take with you the evaluation form that was on your seat. We're only able to provide these sorts of things for you when I can actively lobby to get support or sponsorship to be able to do it, because we don't have funding to do it. So your feedback in those evaluation slips is crucial to that. That's the small payment we ask you to make with your time. But we've given you a free reply paid envelope, so you can do it in your own time with a cup of tea, cup of coffee later, but please post it back to us. And finally, before I thank our guests, we have for sale the Nature Strip, which is a calendar celebrating our beautiful Ghana and Peramake lands around here. Natural environment with older people in the nude, and yes, I am one of them. You've got to practice what you preach, and you've got to have a bit of integrity. Please put your hands together for Michelle, Leah and Alex. That was a fabulous session on community co-housing development. Make sure you've got your name and